Greetings, everyone. I'm Tim Anderson, aka Renfell, and welcome to the latest episode of Mondays in MMORPGs, where we talk about all of our favorite and sometimes hated aspects of these games that we're so passionate about. And today we're going to be talking about endgame, which is a controversial topic in and of itself because there are a lot of different viewpoints about the right way to do things, the wrong way to do things, should a game have endgame or not. I am joined by returning guest Scribbles.
Hello, I'm Scribbles, or they call me Jesse. That's my real name. I work on Defend the Night. I was part of Ninja Loot Games. We were formed in 2019, and I'm just here to talk about different aspects of MMORPGs and the development area.
And we are joined by a special guest today, Buffalo from, I believe your game's called Carth, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick, aka Buffalo. We are currently working on Carth. I'm the CEO and developer from Deji Race Studios, LLC. Carth is available later this year through Steam. Available to wishlist now. CARTH.
All right. Welcome, guys. I totally screwed up my grid there for a minute on the viewpoint. So those of you who are watching this visually, you're gonna be like, "What's going on? Everything's pinging off," but we got to figure it out now. All right. So before we jump into today's topic, what have you guys been up to this week? I know that you were on a road trip, Scribbles. I went crazy with Solasta came out this last week, so that's literally I don't marathon sessions anymore, and I streamed for 11 hours on Saturday, and will never do that ever again. Because it was just like I couldn't feel my legs by the time it was done, and it was like, yeah, I can't do that. But that game has been awesome. What are you guys up to?
I went to Sacramento, California, and drove to Pittsburgh from there. And one of the things I wanted to say was I was out in Utah in the remote areas, and I saw Starlink. I don't know if you guys ever seen Starlink, but it was like a bunch of lights in the sky that were lining up into a stream of like a line of lights. And as soon as they moved in position and were equally distributed across the sky, it turned off. It was either Starlink or some UFO or something like that. So it was definitely neat to see.
Well,
But I'm glad I'm back.
well, thankfully you're back and you didn't get abducted because the government
Right.
has finally at least confirmed in a way UFOs or the fact that there are things out there that they can't explain, and they've released all this documentation. So, hey man, you're safe and sound and you didn't get probed on the road, so
I didn't have an itchy butt when I woke up, so I'm good.
As far as myself, this last week, couple weeks have been pretty intense for us. We have the Steam Next Fest that goes public through the Steam platform on the 16th for the public, where we'll have an available demo. But I did not realize till 2 weeks ago, we signed up for the press access. It was basically, in the registration, there was a little button that allowed the press access, because that makes sense. I guess I didn't pay attention because that's on the 7th. So we got a couple more days.
chop
So,
chop.
and that's, yeah. Basically, we went a week and a half ago, listed everything out. Okay, these are the bugs. This is what we want to fine tune. Busted that out in a day and a half, and then we had another list and another list and another list. I keep incrementally getting smaller, but the lists keep popping back up.
Yeah.
So
No sleep till press day.
no sleep.
That
Yeah.
always happens at some point. Um, I'm not familiar with your game so much. What I mean, I've briefly watched a few videos, and I was on the Steam page the other day. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your game since you're new on
Yeah.
the show?
Yeah. So Carth is a medieval based fantasy game. Um, it originates actually from tabletop gaming. Myself and some good friends and family we wanted to get back into kind of tabletop stuff and used D&D 5th edition. Didn't really like any of the books or going that direction with stuff. So I just spent a couple days and kind of thinking through a world. Next thing you know, years later, and dozens of people that came in and out for fun, we had this thing we called Carth. This is back around 2014 plus a few years. And looking at game development and was thinking through games, and my wife continuously pushed me. I thought some other ideas about some games and pushed me like, you already have a game.
Just do
You
it.
already have this whole world like thought through. So realistically, we thought it out and what type of game would we want to play, and didn't want to make a turn-based game. We wanted actually kind of some different kind of combat, different set of rules, going away from Dungeons and Dragons, as that's been done, and as you were saying, just came out games using those rules, and they're great. It is great, but we wanted a more survival setting, but cooperative, and keeping that idea of tabletop, like your party and your adventure with cooperation. So we have a large open world map, and we're also offering. We have four basically finished smaller maps meant for if you just want a PvP, want a team deathmatch, do some capture the flag. So we're trying to adhere to a few different things there, but realistically, crafting, building, survival elements, level your player. A lot of survival games I feel kind of miss the mark, where you're just whoever, not even named. You pop up and you're lost in this forest, or you pop up and it's the end of the world with zombies running everywhere, and you're basically the same as everyone else for the most part. We really wanted to delve into the kind of RPG style of that and bring it to. So have some pretty robust survival elements with actually injuries, diseases, things like that, but also a vast amount of feats, skills, so you can care about your player. Is really what we're aiming for. And most of the mechanics, everything's there. We still consider ourselves an alpha and aiming for like a early access release later this year. Is basically it. But yeah, you can post in the comments. We can send a little link to it, and you can check it out. We're just a 2-man team, so
Plugging away.
hard. Yeah, lugging away, and it's coming to life though, and we're excited. The next fest coming up will be the real big public push. First kind of look and real feedback.
I took some look at some videos I think it was last week, and was browsing through things, but it's always good to hear from the source. So I know that coming from, you've got your background with Carth, Scribbles has got his background with Defend the Night. I've got my background with spending about 7 years on the Saga of Leucemia. So we're going to be looking at this conversation from two angles, which is end game as a player, and then end game as a developer, and what you guys are working on and what we think about different things. I think one of the things that I remember from Endgame when I first got going in MMORPGs, which again we're going to talk about EverQuest yet again, but that's the kind of the first. Endgame in EverQuest was so different than what Endgame is today, because we didn't have persistent zones. We didn't have limitations on raid size. We didn't have any of that stuff. We didn't have lockout timers or instanced zones. It was all public, all open. Anybody could go after the mobs. And so, in one way, it was a more cooperative experience back in the day. But on the other hand, it was also this insane situation where if you went into an area, and because it was all open and other people could come in and do it as well, if you went in there, you had to go in there with the intent to do it. And there used to be very long time ago, there used to be in a kind of an unofficial schedule. We had a calendar that was set up on the forums, and guilds would sign up on the calendar, and we would all respect each other's window of time to go do that piece of content, so everybody got a chance. And that did work for a couple of years, and I don't mean this in any way as a slight, but eventually what happened was, as MMORPGs became more than just the North American market and it spread to the rest of the world, we saw a bunch of the Asian community or the Asian guilds came in and said, well, we're on a different time zone, and we don't really care about your schedules. It's free for all, first come, first serve, and that took that scheduled end game into a free for all end game where it became all about he who has the biggest guild and he who can get there first gets the loot. And so that became this scenario where end game, 2, 3 years into that became this scenario of I remember being on call and
That phone.
yeah.
Did you guys call it that phone? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like you're literally on call, and as soon as you get the call, it's everybody logs in as quickly as possible, and it's go time. But you also had these scenarios where because there wasn't persistent zones, if you went into somewhere to do a piece of content, you had to go and do it until it was done. And this led to scenarios where you might be online for 18 hours, 24
Right.
hours to clear a zone and to make sure that you get all of the boss mobs before someone else comes in and does it. I have a lot of fond memories of those times, but I was also a 19, 20-year-old kid. I did have a day job, but I had a lot of. I still have the same amount of free time today that I had back then, but my list of things that I like to do has diversified greatly. We didn't have Netflix back then. We didn't have the PlayStation Network. We didn't have Xbox Live, Hulu, Amazon Prime. We didn't have all of these things that are vying for our attention. So, kind of going forward to where we are today, I think that if I look at a game like World of Warcraft, and me having gone through EverQuest 2 for about 7 or 8 years, the end game of today is very much about instanced zones where you can go in with X amount of party members. So you have to be a lot more strategic about who you take with you because you can only take a limited amount of people. And the zones are persistent, so you can go in, progress a certain distance, stop, log out, come back tomorrow night or the next day, and keep going and until you clear it at your own pace. And then you have a lockout timer, so you can't do the same zone again for like a week or 2 weeks or whatever the case may be. So there's that aspect of the end game that has kind of evolved. But then we also see a lot of this other stuff, which is things like games trying to say that end game is repeatable, daily grind crap. I see this a lot. I think we see it a lot more in mobile games, but it definitely is prevalent. I think like Final Fantasy 14 is a good example of you log in and it's like you have a daily queue of things that you're supposed to do. And I know that Warcraft has it as well. Not all games do. I play because I play Lord of the Rings a lot, and it doesn't have that daily thing, that daily list of things to do. Um, Star Wars: The Republic kind of has that as well, but that's less of an MMO these days and more of a single player. But anyway, those are just kind of some of the things we've looked at. I'd love to hear you guys talk about, what are some of the things that you like about the old way of doing things compared to some of the things you like about the new way of doing things? Because for me, as much as I miss the camaraderie of having, 150 people and the challenge of getting all those people together and everything else, when I moved to EverQuest 2 and it was suddenly, oh, now we're doing six group, or these four group raids, so we've got 24 people, it's like all of a sudden we went from being able to take as many as we want to now having, oh, we can only have this many. We have how many people are in the guild? We have 40 people in the guild. So now we have to try to find, we have your A list and your B list, and you start to do rotations of who's coming in and who's coming out, and you're tracking everything in DKP and participation percentages to spend points. It became this management nightmare, but it was also, for me anyway, I like time structure like that. I like to do management of people. I like to, as a project manager, that's just something that I like to do. I like to analyze and slot people in and figure out, okay, what's the best group makeup for this particular fight. But what about you guys? I've been ranting here for a few minutes, so I'll shut
I
up now.
guess I guess I can guess I could tackle the dailies, the daily end game that you're talking about. I I don't necessarily like it, but I understand why people enjoy it. People, there's some people around. Uh, they like that sort of structured of what to do every single day. They know what they need to do, and are kind of lost without that. Um, we enjoy that because we were from an era that didn't have the structure, so we had to find our own things to do. So I understand why it's there. It's not bad. It's not good. It's just part of the game. I think I like the open world aspect, because those end game raiders, they like to compete against each other. It's not something that I would like to do. I'd like to compete against the environment, or the RPG elements, compete against that. Compete against the dragon. But there's a large quantity of people that like to compete against guild versus guild to get there. That means like things like leapfrogging and seeing if they can destroy certain mobs faster. The thing I don't like about that open world situation is what I've seen in the past is people would have a skeleton crew near where the spawns are, like say a dragon spawn, and they would keep all the mini bosses down. And as soon as the real spawn, the boss mob spawns, they would do the bat phone and call everybody in, and everybody would log on at the same time, and then kill the boss. That's just what playing whack a mole. It's not fun for me. I don't know who would think it was fun. It's just definitely not something I'd like to do. I'd like to get away from that. So, randomizing those spawn points, doing a little bit of RNG in that specific area would help out that scenario. What
One
do you
of the
guys think about that?
Well, I think real quick, I remember in Vanguard they had what was called the Golden Mob, which was basically everything was open world, but when you spawned a Golden Mob, it was locked to your group.
Mm.
So it was instanced but not instanced in the sense, and you could basically, I believe, if I remember, it's been a long time. I remember that you could do it like that, but I think there was a point, I could be misremembering, but I do remember being able to flag it at some point to where other people could help you with it, if you chose to. But otherwise, you could choose to keep it locked to your group and your encounter, which kind of helped with the whole. Because the way the Golden Mob worked was, in a lot of these cases, progression content or quest related mobs, you could then spawn a version of it for your group without having to worry about another guild poop socking it
Right.
and locking it down to where no one else had access to it. Um,
And I
Yeah,
think oh, sorry. Um,
I was
I
just
was
going to
just
comment
thinking of,
on I was just going to comment on what did you call it? Poop sock?
Poop socking.
Now, where did that come from?
Poop socking, yeah, that's another old raid term. Pooping in the sock, like you're at your desk so long you just poop in a sock, man.
All right.
I don't know anybody that actually did that, but it's one of those
yeah.
Yeah, I
random
knew.
internet memes.
I knew what it was, but I just wanted you to say it.
I I'm just remembering back, and I still feel this way. And I still do. I get really pushed away from the massive amount of people in some games that I don't know what it is, because I like being immersed, and I understand in some big city and some giant West Coast server that I'm hooked into that there are thousands of people maybe running around. But when there's 1,000 something people running around doing their own thing, and I just feel almost like a part of a beehive or something go along with my daily quest, that everyone else is doing the same dang thing. So I'm going out to kill however many wolves, and there's hundreds of other people doing the same thing from the same guy, that it pushed me away from some games at a younger age. And I'll still play. I seem to find myself, but I get turned off pretty quickly too. I don't want to list any games mad, especially newer games that are still relevant. I find myself in a weird spot, and the same with the end game. If I did stick it out, it gets a little worse, where I feel like I've put so much time in, but I am still. I don't know. I understand as a developer, and from that standpoint of it is much easier, because coming up with, say, hundreds of, for this next week or this next month or this new season, hundreds of different quests that are spawning out, instancing differently for each person, and not everybody's getting the same thing, or somehow tying to people's race or religion or their alignment, how things could be different. for each person and not kind of funneling in the same direction. I get frustrated. I
You,
do
you
with
just said
some games.
something that I think for me, I was just thinking about when you said, I guess it's the easiness or the relevance of dailies because it's an infinite amount of content, so the developers don't have to try to stay ahead of the end game player. And that's one of those things that, on a personal note, I've been at the top many years ago. I haven't cared about it for a long time, but I did raid exclusively from about 2001 until about 2009, and did world firsts and server firsts and whatever. I've no lifed it. There was one point I remember I had a month where I played over 300 hours in a month in an MMORPG, and looking back at that, going, what the hell? Like, what was I thinking? In that, because it's literally that was no lifing outside of my day job. And there's no way in a realistic world where a developer can stay ahead of that
Of that.
type of
Yeah.
player. But I also think that, at least from my perspective, looking at all the data that I was, working with on Saga, it's such a small percentage of players who are at that top. I mean, we're talking a, 1 percentile amount of people who play like that compared to the other 99% of gamers. However, the unfortunate reality about that 1% is they also are that vocal minority who are the ones who will stream it, they'll screenshot it, they'll be out there bitching about everything, they're on the forums raising a fuss. Whereas the other 99% are just the casual people who don't give a shit, who just want to log in and have a cool fantasy world or a cool science fiction world to log into and immerse themselves in. Um, so the end game scenario, that's a tricky one to navigate because no matter how much content you produce or how quickly you produce it, they will consume it 10 times faster than you thought they would, and then they'll just bitch about having nothing else to do. And it's like, there's a whole other game here to play. Like, I love looking at EverQuest now as a game, or World of Warcraft. These are another good example. These are games that have been out for decades now and have hundreds, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I can say that, I think, hundreds of zones and dungeons and hundreds, if not thousands, of quests that you can go off and
Yeah.
do. Excuse me, but people only ever want to do. They only ever want the end game. It's like, well, I just want the best, newest, shiniest loot. And I wonder where, at one point, it's always weird to me to think about at what point did the game become about getting the best piece of loot as opposed to going back to the tabletop reference that you said earlier, Buffalo. I also have that same, you know, reference point because for me, like Saga Blasphema was a tabletop game back in 1999, like
Exactly. Right.
20 years before it was ever an MMORPG concept. And then what I'm working on now with my brother and my wife is another tabletop world. If you go back to tabletop, it is never about, like you can't even conceptualize what the
That's the
end
thought
looks
here.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, because it's like you're playing a game where someone as a DM has a campaign for you. Maybe they have a module that they're using, but in both cases, what
Right.
you don't know what the end goal is. It's just you start off, you're in a tavern, you're on the road, your
Hmm.
caravan got attacked, and suddenly you're all thrown together, these four, five, six people, and now you're being presented with these storyline options, and you're going forth, and it's about the adventure and
Right.
the world. And yes, it is very epic, especially when you talk about not necessarily fifth edition, because fifth edition I find
A little different.
it's a lot different, and it's especially with like the advantage disadvantage rolls, and like there's no more penalties. Like if I'm a dwarf, I don't have like a negative anything. It's just I have positive stats here. And if you go back to like first edition or second edition, there were pros and cons to the different
Yeah.
races. And nowadays everybody's trying to whitewash it and say, well, we're not allowed to call them races anymore because that's insensitive, and we got to call them species. And I get that to
Yeah.
some
Right.
degree, but at the same
It's
time,
insensitive to the
right?
dwarves out there in the
Yeah,
world.
it's
I get
like,
it.
come on. But at the same time, I understand it from that perspective, but at the same time, it takes away a lot of what made first and second edition so magical. Because if you rolled a dwarf as an example, yeah, you were super tough and super strong, but you were ugly as fuck, and like
Right.
you didn't, you weren't a good fit in society, and yeah, you were good in a dungeon, but you might not be that great in a town setting. But because everybody had these weaknesses, it was really epic when you got your first like +1 sword. And
Mm-hmm.
that even was the case in like early EverQuest, where you know all you had was like banded armor for months on end, and you get your first. That was the big thing, because it even exists now on the progression servers, is that you can't hit certain mobs without a magical weapon. And so
Right. Right.
you come into these scenarios where it's like, I'm gonna have to run because I don't have there's no way for me to defeat this monster because I haven't had a magical weapon yet. And now, you know, so I understand the the desire to get a magical item or to have an item be important, but I still haven't ever been able to pinpoint in the cycle of MMORPGs when it went from being about the adventure and exploring
Mm-hmm.
this massive world and then suddenly became focused on, well, it's all about the end game. I don't know when
Yeah.
to pinpoint that.
I
It's
I I think this is I think there's a lot of topics we're about to touch on. I'll try to just
it's all
stick
good,
to
man.
one
Nah, go
exactly
for
like
it.
this.
Go for it.
I'll pick one so I don't talk too long. When we're talking the tabletop stuff, you are talking a very if people that haven't, you should try it. Pick a tabletop.
Yeah.
There are lots of them where you can do it, and you have your game master or what us real nerds call a dungeon master.
DM.
You very much are immersed, and it is very much a slower pace thing as you're at the speed of that dungeon master. You are not at your complete you are at your free will, but you are not at complete free will, and a lot of it is in your imagination and everything. Once we turn that, maybe even instantly, and we can talk EverQuest and all these, which all is spawning realistically from that Dungeons and Dragons or very early other kind of tabletop stuff. This is where all this came from, um, as we all know, or we should know. Once you've made that this is this world, and you are not locked in with anybody really in control of that, and you are not locked in with your friends that you are moving together, and it is slow paced, you can just go from point A to point B, and maybe if you went to point C without that magical sword, you're going to run into stuff that you can't hurt, but you can handle point B to point A all day long, and then you're able to get it very much faster. Like you said, you spend 10 hours sitting there in any of these MMORPGs, your level, whatever, through the roof, feeling great, got your magic stuff, got gold, moving along. You spend 10 hours sitting there in some sort of tabletop setting. You barely made it past the first town, and you've talked to these different people. The DM did. You got an idea of the lore, and you all drank one too many glasses of whatever you're drinking, and people are laughing afterwards and going home. This a true like open world in a video game setting is different than a tabletop setting, and I would not be surprised that really thinking the EverQuest is one of the first and WoW and stuff. Think about it, right? It goes pretty quick. That amount of time is sitting at the computer compared to sitting at a tabletop. It switched instantly, I would assume.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. Because even if you look at the earliest days of Warcraft, the classic experience now compared to that was even faster than the original EverQuest because they took the EverQuest model and just enhanced it. But even EverQuest, you just used a good example because I was thinking back to some of these sessions where I used to do these all-nighters playing D&D back when I was a late teenager, and it was you're just hanging out and you're rolling dice, and
Mm-hmm.
you might not ever even leave that town to go on your first quest because you're exploring all the different villages, having conversations, everybody's role playing, doing voices and all this other stuff. And then even in EverQuest, as slow as it was, you still had that level based progression where a 10-hour setting was so much different than a 10-hour setting in tabletop, and it was definitely about the forward progression, as opposed to there definitely was still immersion in,
For
lore
sure.
and quests, but it was definitely, well, I need to be able to, I want to go into Crushbone, therefore I need to get levels to go into Crushbone. That is
Mhm.
a good way to look at it.
Mhm.
It
Well,
might have been instant.
well, if you guys know that there's always been competition in video games,
Mm,
so you had like the competition like with Pac-Man or with the Space Invaders. Everybody wants to be the
the
best.
best.
So so it kind of moved in after everybody, all the role players were done with their role playing stories. What happened was the gamers that like to be on top came in. What happened with that was they wanted to be the best. They wanted to have the fastest running guild to beat the dragons. They wanted to up their chances of winning loot. They wanted to uh, push the systems that are MMORPGs are created on to gain an advantage, whatever that may be. So I think that what happened was it just got more popular, and we had all sorts of gamers, not just the ones that liked RPGs. We also got those advanced gamers that like to be the best. So that's what happened, I think,
Mhm.
which isn't bad. I mean, I understand both gameplays. I understand liking to be more powerful than the next guy. Uh, I mean, it's just a progression of the societies, different societies in gaming.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
It really does. Different types of gamers sitting down and playing.
Yep, it
You
just made it
and
more.
you still have that.
It
Oh
just
yeah,
made
you
it more
still
popular. Mhm.
right. You still have that in different, and I think it's enjoying a certain type, as everyone does, enjoying a certain type of gameplay. And maybe from some of that tabletop stuff or just certain games and trying. We've all been playing games a very long time, and I remember one of the first games I truly remember sitting, not Super NES but NES for me, and sitting there and Zelda. And we had a little gambit of games, and my cousins had games too that were different, and everyone had their choice, but Zelda really hooked me.
Mhm.
And
Right,
I
right, right.
still, you know,
Yeah, I totally get it. I mean, right now, if you look at a streamer, there's types of streamers. The one that read the storyline and give you the background of the whole story, like
Hi.
Renfield. And there's guys that just go fast, click 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 click, and
oh
smash
yeah,
heads. And there's not a wrong way or right way, but it's just different. And for those different players, you gotta accommodate those.
The speed run, you made me. I've said this on this show and I've said it elsewhere. I've always laughed when I go into an MMORPG and people are bragging about how fast they did the hard mode of the dungeon. It's like, well, we did it in 10 minutes. We did it in 15 minutes. And I'm literally sitting here and I've said in the past, I'm going to say it again. I have had shits that last longer than 15 minutes. I go in there and I'm in there for an hour. I'm reading a book and just taking my time. It's like you can't call something hard or difficult if it can be done in 10 or 15 minutes of time. Obviously, there are those types of players who like to consume content that way, but hard and difficult, hard slash difficult, I think of things like mastering the craft of being a carpenter or a smith or a plumber, an electrician, game development, art, whatever the case may be, mastering something as a profession or even a hobby where you're spending hundreds, if not thousands of hours on that thing to get good at it because it's hard, it's challenging. That, for me at least, is the definition of challenge. And so when I look at what I consider to be good end game in a video game as something that requires to me to make an investment of time, an investment of effort, which is why I've always appreciated the requirement of needing to have a guild to be able to do certain things. And another way to look at it is you should not be able to go in there as a little level 1 guy and take out a dragon. Like that's not realistic. Like Thor, especially if you look at the not even the original origins of that character, but looking at the Avengers version, Thor could not take on Thanos by himself. Like he had to go recruit the Avengers. Like the Avengers had to come together, and all of those are powerful beings in their own right. But they had to come together as this fighting force, this team to take out this super badass. And there's an aspect to Endgame that I've always looked at it and said it shouldn't be accessible by everyone. It should be something that is unique to that 1% or 5% or whatever of people who want to put in the time and the effort, and etc. Which this is something I wanted to bring up as part of this conversation, which is the token system that I see in a lot of games, which allows the casual gamer to grind tokens doing single player content or small group content, and then at the end of the day, be able to get rewards that are similar, if not the same as, what the raiders are getting in their version of the end game. And that I'd love to hear you guys' take on this, because for me, the moment that started to become a reality, I just kind of got turned off on raiding. I was like, what's the fucking point of raiding anymore if anybody can log in and get similar rewards just because they put some time in? Because I don't think time is the only limitation. It's also the challenge of getting going back to the Avengers again. Iron Man didn't get along with other people in
Right,
that
right.
party. There are interpersonal relationships, and there are factions, and there are things you have to learn how to work together with people. There's the project management aspect of it, there's the time management aspect of it. Some people look at it and say, well, that's a second job. I don't want to have to deal with a second job. Great. You don't have to do that type of content if you don't want to, but it should be unique and only accessible by the people who want to go to the distance. Kind of like not everyone should be able to earn a gold medal at the Olympics. Like that should be something that takes time and effort to get to. So I'd love to hear your
Yeah,
guys' thoughts on tokens and
I,
stuff.
I, I think you just kind of almost, I wouldn't say the gold medal, but the blue participation thing.
Yeah.
And as devs and especially bigger studios, and what really is your goal, and what do really some of the biggest ones we think about? What do they come with? They come with a subscription tag. It could be free to play initially, or $5, maybe $20. Maybe you have to buy that next DLC, but it's also that subscription based whatever. They want as many, and sorry to say, but as many people humanly possible, giving them $5 a
Hmm.
month. That's a lot more money than a premium base. You paid $49.99 at this day and age, or $59.99 apparently USD for that game, and that's all you're ever going to pay. Well, at $5 a month, and you can hook them for the next 3 years, 5 years beyond. It's a lot more money on the financial aspect of that. And so, how do you keep some of those people? Everyone gets their participation, right?
Hmm.
It makes, and I'm with you that not everyone should be able to get there. It should, in theory, a well balanced game. If you have different classes and different things, there should not be a one shoe fits everything. That human tank with the iron fist, like Thor, will rock until a certain point, and then he needs help, and that does make sense. But also including the blue ribbon for everyone, the people that want to be that single player. They are very much a shut in, even though they're playing an MMO. That don't want to be with anybody. Get their tokens. I don't know. I'm going to say I don't like the idea because I like the immersion. I like people. I'm a people person. I want to play games with my friends. But at the same point, from a business aspect, you want that $5 subscription or $10 per month from every single person humanly possible
Yeah,
to play your game.
that comes back
Inclusion.
to the last time I looked at the data, and it's been a couple of years, but the average lifetime value of an MMORPG player is around $225. So, and you look at the single player game, even though costs have gone up, we're seeing AAA games now that are going to start costing $70. That's still $70 versus $225. And that does not count the whales like me who spend thousands on games because we play them for 7, 8 years, and we pay subscriptions, and we buy all the
Mm-hmm.
expansions, and we have multiple accounts, um, and then if they have a cash shop, I might occasionally drop money on cool things for my alts
Right.
because I'm like, I've already done that before. I'm just here's $100. I want those things for that character. Um, yeah, it's a catch 22 because from a business perspective, you do want as many people. Well, it depends on the. I suppose it does depend on the goals of the company and the size of the company and how many employees they're running. So, you talking about you having a two-man team. Defend the Night's got a few people. With on
We
Stormhaven, I
got
think
6.
I think the biggest we had was 20 people at one point, but the average team size was around 12 to 15. There are realities of keeping the lights on and what you need to do to bring money in for those things. Um, so there are compromises that have to be made, but it's at one point it's like what's a good compromise and how far does the compromise go? Because that token system has always driven me nuts. But when you're
Right.
looking at a company like Blizzard, Activision, which has investors and there are bottom lines that need to be hit, and they've got 100 million sales and they want to,
Mhm.
you know, if it's a revenue driven model, then yeah, your goal is always going to
Oh
be
yeah.
how do we entice the most amount of people to pay money
Hmm.
to get people going, which unfortunately always comes at the detriment to the game,
Right.
or the longevity of it for the people
And
who
that's
really, really enjoy it.
it's something that we had a talk about, and with our game that we're developing, we are not aiming to have those. It could be considered a MMO. In theory, we are offering, you could P2P for just small players playing together, or dedicated servers that you could pay to host yourself, which can handle. That's the same thing with a giant MMO with 1,000 people on there. It's just a little bit more expensive server. You could put as many people on that server as you want, but allowing the host and who wants to do that, and the players that play the game that they want to play. You want to have a server that's got 250 people in it at any given time. You can cough up the money for that server. You want to just play with a couple people, you don't need to spend any money for that. You want something that handles 60 players possibly at a time, $12 a month. You can, not even to us, you can host that yourself. If you got an old computer in your basement, just leave it turned on, restart it every 8 hours like back in the day. uh, we were reached out from, excitingly enough, some different publishers, and will not say any names, but one of them completely wanted to push us towards subscription based and giant servers because, just like you said, if you look at the average amount of money compared to a premium game with DLC, possible updates, no subscription, you pay once, you got the game, and we're going to update it. And if we come out with a DLC worth some money, you could get it if you want to. It won't, stop you from playing the base game. To $5, $10 a month to play this game in hopes of making as much money as humanly possible. It is a giant beast in MMOs.
Well, I was just
It
just
really
thinking
is.
thinking about the money aspect of it too, because I was just I know it's been a hot topic recently, at least as of this recording, because these episodes come out a little bit later. What is the date today? Like the 3rd or 4th of June or something?
3rd,
Um, what's that?
3rd of June.
3rd of June. Um, the Burning Crusade just launched the most recent World of Warcraft Classic, and the big controversy there was that they sold level boosts for the people who didn't want to bother to level up a character to get it ready for that level for burning to enter the Burning Crusades. And it's not the only game that does that. I mean, Lord of the Rings Online sells level boosts. I think there's 3 different tiers of level boosts. They start at like $60, and I could maybe it's 40. I think it starts at $40 and goes up to 60, something like that. But you want to be level 50, it's this price. You want to be level 80, it's this price. You want to be level 120, it's this price. But it's also a game that's been around for 14, 15 years now. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. Um, and so they have an incentive because they have an old population, the vast majority of which are at the end game, or they're at the cap. That might be a better way of saying it. They're at the cap. And so they have an incentive to get everybody who's new to the game to that cap as quickly as possible, because all of the new content that they push out, and this is the same for every single company out there that does this these days. They're all offering some type of level boost or level incentive or skip levels every game every MMORPG out there that's been out for a few years. And then looking at, even it's already being talked about. It got leaked a few weeks back and everybody was up in arms about it with Amazon's New World, coming out and saying ahead of time that, hey, we're going to be offering level boosts and things of that nature in 2022. And it's like, your game's not, but I think this is the important part of this conversation. It has become so ingrained in gaming society that the end game is the only thing that's important, that companies ahead of time, before the game is even launched, are thinking about the monetization of maximizing that level speed and getting people to the cap as quickly as possible, because they know that's where people want to be. People want to be highest level. And when I say people, I'm saying generalized, most players. That's just the nature of the way people play games these days. It's very rare. I came into Final
Yeah. So
Fantasy 4. Go ahead.
just a comment. Stop making your game suck.
Right.
That's pretty much what it is.
Right.
That's the other way. That's a good way to look at it.
Make horizontal progression. I know everyone's gonna be like, well, horizontal progression is not gonna work. It's
It's
not where
boring.
everybody wants to be. Dude, just make it a little bit better. Just make your game
Yeah.
better. Don't make it boring.
Yeah.
Don't make leveling boring.
I can't even. Hey, as you said, it's ingrained apparently into maybe a huge majority of these MMOs and different games and AAA companies, engraved in that idea to get people to that end game, to then release another DLC they have to buy and continue that subscription, because that's all that people want. Well,
Yeah.
and maybe they are very, very correct that you are in a small majority, Ren, of wanting to read all the books and stream it to your friends.
I'm
and
definitely in
really
the
be
minority.
immersed.
Yeah.
You're in a small minority, and I'm in an even smaller minority that doesn't even want to play the game, because it, like you said, quit making your games suck. Like, if I can't be immersed from please go in the basement and kill these rats till let's go kill the white dragon on top of the mountain. If I can't be immersed in between there, I ain't gonna play your game.
I was just remembering the first Baldur's Gate game. It was an optional side quest when you first start off in Candlekeep.
When you first start.
And there's an optional side quest in Candlekeep where you go it's like a combat tutorial, I think, where you go kill rats in the basement, and you don't really get any experience from it. It's just this thing where you go do it. But it's just that sparked that in my memory, because it was this immersive, because you're in Candlekeep for the first time, and it's like, I want to go in every single building and I want to see what is there to do in this place. Screw Gorion. I don't want to leave town until I've done everything that's here. Whereas to the modern player, they log in and they're like, okay, where's Gorion? Because he's the quest giver. They're like, I want to get to him because he gets me out of town and he gets me to the inn, and then I get and it's like, wait, there's like 20 quests that you can do between here. This came into my mind, and I know so many people bitched about it that the company actually gave you a way to pay to skip it, which is Final Fantasy 14 with a Realm Reborn. It was all this mandatory content that you had to do to get, and everyone said you have to do it, and the game doesn't get good until you get through it, and it's this slog of hundreds of hours of gameplay. So I was convinced to try this game the first time I ever played it, which is probably 4 years ago now. And I was convinced to try it, and I got in it, and I was having fun, because I am the type of player who will immerse myself, and I like to read the quests. And the first time that I had to do a dungeon, I got into the dungeon, and everybody's bitching at me because I'm wanting to watch the cutscene, and everybody else literally just hit the space bar or whatever to skip the cutscene because they're on their daily grind. They're just doing the daily queue. And I'm coming into the game as a new player several years into the game's lifespan, and I'm taking my time. And I'm finding out that, okay, by the third dungeon I had done, I was like, oh, so I'm the guy that everyone hates because I'm taking my time, and I'm like, hey, what's this tunnel? And what's over here? Oh no, don't worry about that. We're here. And it's like I'm like, where'd everybody go? And like the groups disappeared because they're on a speed run to try to do the dungeon in 15 minutes. And I'm like sitting here going, I would like to take 3 hours and explore this place. And actually, I want to see every nook and cranny. Are there quest items over there? Is there a box that I might need to click on? And it's like nobody cares about the optional quests. Nobody cares about the side quests. And it's like, no, we have a daily grind. We got to get the tokens because I could turn the tokens in for that badass sword, which gives me the equivalent of a raid gear, and it's just like, ah!
Yeah, so you gotta
Right.
get back. You gotta get back to where the quest is epic again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you remember back in the day when you had to actually farm or go to that area, you didn't have to do it with a team. You had maybe a couple people, but you knew what the progression was because you were the one finding the NPCs, reading what they had to say, and then searching the next step. When
The,
when you have these cutscenes and everything, everybody has to be locked together.
Hmm.
And so I'm getting a little bit out of the bag here, but
go for it.
what we need to do is to try to give the player, a small group of players, the option to do the quest and then grab all the information. And when they need to fight a mob, that's a separate. You could have like a generator call out for, you know, other people to help you. But that way you're not pissing off a large quantity of people. So you got to kind of segment that. So people like Renfield that wants to read all the storyline are okay, and they won't be mad at them. So and then
Oh
whenever
yeah.
you want to have when everybody's on the same level, like I need this coin off this NPC after he dies, so everybody can join up then to kill the boss and blah blah blah.
You just
Everybody has the same coin.
you just described the Coldane Ring and Shawl quests
Yeah.
in EverQuest,
So
which I remember very early on in Saga development, I had a mandate which was no fetch quests allowed, and every quest we do in the game has to be of an equivalent scope to the Coldane Ring and Shawl quests in EverQuest. Because to me, that's like the pinnacle of a quest because each one had like I think like 9 steps if I remember correctly,
Right.
and it was this component where you could do some of it by yourself, some of the farming, but a lot of it you could do with 2 or 3 people. It was like, oh, I need to get these
Hmm.
hides, I need to get these ground drop items, and I got to go off into the eastern waste or wherever it was, and I gotta. But that was something that took weeks, if not months. And I remember it taking months the first time I did it because you also had to level up your crafting for all of these different um, crafting things for all the different crafting skills. So it was something where you had to invest a ton of time, but you didn't need another player to do crafting. You didn't need another player to look for a ground spawn. You could do that stuff on your own. It was risky as hell being out
Right.
there
Right.
as like running, especially if you were a non Spirit of
yeah,
the Wolf class, like you got to really be
the, the
taking advantage of invisibility and stuff.
the big thing I remember from that is you didn't have to be max level to do this.
No.
That's for me. That's huge because what does everybody do? Race to the end. Then they do the stuff that they need to do later, like
Right. Right.
Oh
get
yeah,
that
you
get that.
just yeah.
So what this does to you is you can do it at level 30, or you can do it at level 40, and get more people involved in it, and not have your game suck like
Yeah.
You,
everybody else.
you just said something else that just remembered me. I can't remember which game it was. It's got to be Final Fantasy 14. Um, I'd asked. Oh, it even showed. But I remember this popped up in World of Warcraft Classic too when we did Classic with everybody. I wanted to do the crafting from day one and harvesting from day one. So I was taking my time working my blacksmithing up, and everybody else is like, "Fuck that, level to max, and then you can just buy everything, and you don't have to worry about doing the grind." And it's like, but I like harvesting, like, but there was this, and it was also happened to Final Fantasy 14, excuse me. I wanted to do crafting, and and I'm not joking, every single person I talked to said, level to max, then go do crafting because it's easier that way.
Right.
This path of least resistance. But like you said, if it didn't suck, um,
Mhm,
you might not need
mhm.
to do
Yeah.
that.
I was
Yes.
just having a flash. I almost want to make a little, almost like a pixel art game just for you, Renfall. It'd be great. You'll love the MMO style because there'll be no quest markers, no mini
Yep.
map, no nothing. That would be your game because you're immersed forever. And that I think you take that away from these MMOs and those race to the end game. Where's your quest marker? Well, where the hell is this? I'm supposed
So,
to find this person in this city, but there's no bright yellow thing floating in the corner of my map telling me where to go.
I
What?
you're new on
Where's
the
this?
show, so I got
Yeah.
to tell you a story. We interviewed a trio of brothers at one point to potentially come work for us,
Mm-hmm.
and this is years ago now. And during the conversation, they had never played EverQuest. They had only ever played Warcraft, and the conversation came up well, how are you going to create content? Like, what kind of content are you going to put in your game? And I said, it is emergent content. It's what the players want. It's a sandbox. And like, what do you mean? And it's like, well, you create your own adventure. It's do what you want. There are quest lines, but there's also I want to go north. I want to go
Mhm.
explore that mountain. I heard someone talk about this cavern over here. Let's go check out these swamps over there. Like the option to go do what you want to do as opposed to being on the rails experience. Because I've talked about this a lot. Someone said this is back 2015, 16. Someone said I was on mmorpg.com forums and talking about dungeons that could last for weeks to months. And I had people calling bullshit on that and saying that's not true. A dungeon is 2 hours max. And I went, you've obviously never played the EverQuest that I played. And so to prove a point, we streamed this. This is a long time ago now. It's like 5, 6 years ago now. We streamed it. We took characters on the Project 1999 server. We went and leveled up characters, and we went to Befallen and went in at like level 8 or 9 or whatever, and we sat there and leveled all the way to 20 in that one dungeon over the course of like 2 months.
Right, right.
Like just we clear this section over these 3 or 4 sessions, get everybody their keys. Once everybody's got their keys, we go to the beyond the door, go to the ledge. Now we're at the ledge for the next 4 or 5 sessions, get a few more levels, go a little deeper, get a few more levels, go a little bit deeper. But it was a thing that we played 3, 4 nights a week, 2 to 3 hours each session, and it took us 2 months to go from
Oh
like
yeah.
level 10 to level 20. And then I posted that and said, here's a dungeon that lasted 2 months. And everybody's like, yeah, but with the modern day wiki and knowing this, this, and this, like, and I'm like, yeah, that's the point. I knew where to go to get the keys. I knew where to go to get the door. I know where the traps in the floor are, all those
Right,
things of
right.
that nature. When you played this back in the day, and there were no wikis, there were no mini maps, none of these things, no
Hmm.
waypoints showing you where to go, you spent even more time. And like I
Oh
can't
yeah.
even imagine being the first person to try to figure out like the epic weapon quests in EverQuest 1 because those descriptions you got from the NPCs were so vague. It was like you need to harvest. I'm thinking like Ranger and Druid. You need like this ripened heart fruit or whatever that was a harvestable item from Rivervale. And like nowhere in the text description of that quest are you told where to find that item. It's just like you need to find this ripened heart fruit or whatever it was called. And I'm thinking about the first person to figure that out because by the time I got around to doing my epic weapon, I knew where to go because it was a couple
Somebody
years into
else.
the game and somebody else had already figured that out. But I remember playing like getting world firsts and stuff in EverQuest 2, the Peacock quest line in particular. Those first like 2, 3 expansions, we were at the top of the game, and there was no wiki. There was no information about any of this stuff. So we were going into these encounters completely blind, into these quests completely blind. And even EverQuest 2 back in the day didn't give you all the waypoints and everything else. So there was, when we would be spending dozens
Oh
of
yeah.
this goes back to when I was gaming like hundreds of hours per month because being at the vanguard of that, you're figuring it all out. But these days, everybody can just go to a wiki and figure it out, or they can watch a streamer do it, and
Sure.
in 5 minutes, it's done. And it's like,
Well, and there's a difference, right? You want to appeal to everybody, so some people will use that wiki.
mm,
I would try my damnedest not to jump on a wiki or look at a cheat guide or a video, how-to guide, because I'd enjoy it. But if you get frustrated enough after a couple weeks of not being able to find the heart fruit or whatever
look it
we're
up.
looking for here, you can look it up, and that's nice. That is nice, and compared to throwing your keyboard across the room in frustration or you know losing your wife because you're
What was for both of you guys? What do you think is the most epic end game quest you've ever done? And talk about it. Like
now you
how
mean
long did it
on a
take?
in any sort of a game or just MMOs
Let's say any sort
because
of game. Let's say any sort of game. I mean, it is kind of MMORPG specific, but I think any game works because there are other games that are not MMOs that have really epic quests.
Jeez.
hard Some good ones that popped to mind. What was? Oh man, this is a while ago. Neverwinter Nights to
Mm.
Mask of the Betrayal. Is it Mask of the Betrayer?
Or Mask of the
Something like
Betrayer or
that.
something like that. That's
Mask of the Betrayer. That had some depth to it and was kind of one of those your choices mattered through the whole thing.
the keep
Um,
management of that game was also amazing. That was the first time I'd come across that. Um,
yeah, it was that was that one standing out. I don't know, as you know, so many other games are, but that one stood out good. I really kind of felt pretty immersed. Um, Different stuff, you know, the graphics weren't nothing too incredible for it.
Yeah, for me
So,
it was the plane of power flagging
oh,
system.
I'm
That
glad you
oh
said that
man,
because that's on the list of
that was it was so tough. Took forever. I remember getting so pissed off.
that was
But when
70
I got there, I think it was what do you get keyed for um, plane of time, right?
time. Yeah, Plane of Time was
Yeah.
the last thing. So it was like Plane of Justice.
That's,
I don't even remember anymore.
but it was so satisfying getting at the end. But it was a massive pain in the ass because your whole guild had to do it. Um,
And that was
or
72
was
man raids, wasn't it?
it was tough, man. I think it was. It was so hard.
That ranks to me. I've always said that Planes of Power for me is the pinnacle of raid progression or the pinnacle of end game in any MMORPG I've ever played, um, because of the raid progression. Because the entire Planes of Power system was designed for big guilds to go in, and you had to have all your alternate advancement points maxed out. And I mean, it was a progression system where you had to get flagged for this zone, then you got flagged for this one, and then you got flagged for this one. And so there was this progression system. To this day, I think, to me, that is the cream of the crop in terms of raid progression for a guild. But I still think the one that stands out to me as like the most memorable, even though it's not my favorite, was getting my two swords for my ranger in EverQuest One, because that took me 2 years, because
wow.
that was before I got into raiding like full time, and so I was a role player who was part of a raid alliance, and so we weren't raiding every night of the week. It was like we were raiding a couple times a week, and because we didn't have dedicated raid force, we had tanks coming in and out. We had the raid force would switch every week, and so we had a lot more failures than you have when you have a dedicated, A team, B team, C team. So it took about 2 years of, from the time that I started playing EverQuest, which I played about right when it came out, like a month after it launched. But it took me about 2 years to get to till I got my swords, and that still stands out to me as like the most epic quest chain progression that I've ever done in any MMORPG, because it was for me. The POP progression was a little different because it was for the whole guild. But even though you are doing the guild together with the epic weapons, that was my reward. The druid had their reward, the paladin had their reward, and I had these two awesome, flashy swords that had cool spell effects. And having something that took me so long, because even when we went and did the mythical weapons in EverQuest 2, which was the Runes of Kunark, I think was the name of that expansion, um, or Return of Kunark, I forget. But even that only took our guild about 4 months. From like the expansion came out, we were ready to go. We went in. We had our raid force. We'd already been raiding through everything else up to that point, and it was just we got in, started the quests, and by the end of the fourth month, everybody had their mythical weapons. And those were definitely challenging raids, challenging encounters, and we had, especially when we got into towards the end, I can't remember the name of the end dungeon there, but you go in and there's like three or four different wings, and there's like three or four dragons in each wing, and it had like I want to say it had like a 7 day window where you could go in, and the zone was saved for 7 days, but you had to clear it in 7 days before it shut you out and locked you out for like a week.
Oh
So you
wow.
had you had to be very conscious about, we have 7 days to go in and do this, so we have to make sure that we're coming in here every other night and spending at least 3 to 4 hours. And there was a few fights in there, like the one for the guardian weapon in particular. It was this fight where you had to pull him down this long chamber. You had to pull this dragon, and the fight just progressed down this long chamber. And you had to have other classes who were off on the side clicking things at the right time to deactivate his invincibility shield. I could be remembering it incorrectly, but I just remember that kind of stuff going on. And that fight took us, I want to say we had to retry the zone 3 or 4 times in memory before we got that down, but it still only took 4 months. So it was this thing where it was like 4 months is a lot different than 2 years, um, comparatively speaking. But also, thinking about the timeline of releases for expansions back in the day used to be a lot more frequent than they are now. A lot of games will go 2 years, sometimes 3 years between expansions these days. And back in the day, expansions used to be every single year like clockwork. And I think that also comes back to the dailies because I think they feel like they could just throw dailies out there and that keeps people busy and they don't have to spend as much time and man hours developing new content. Whereas back in the day, they used to be very on point about got to have a new expansion out every single year because they didn't have cash shops, and so their money was coming in from subscriptions and the new. You're dropping $40 for every expansion. Um, because I was thinking back to EverQuest 2. I mean, 4 months we're done. Now we're waiting 8 months minimum for the next expansion. What do you do? Well, in that case, we would go roll an alt and do it all over again. Or you've got your alts already at max level, so now we get our alts get geared out as well.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's different day and age. I think a lot more players too. Scribbles pointed it out a little earlier. New players joining in. I think that MMO that and I can just hear it. And I didn't dive into EverQuest, as you guys, and I can just hear in your voice, the fondness and the memories and the sadness of thinking of wasting a month straight, on something, but all the emotions that you really have surrounding that. And as Scribbles pointed out, with all those new players and PC gaming in general, and it reaching out further and further, now you have a lot of people that doesn't matter, and a lot of people that grow up with the fast internet and with tablets and phones everywhere. And we all grew up where you could barely get on to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
That it took a whole night to download one song that we all paid for and didn't use any sort of external software to share music with each other. That's bad. And it took all night. And
whatever boomer.
I'm so glad you said that because literally what was going through my mind. I think it was Kira TV when called me a boomer gamer at one point, and I was just like, "Am I really? I'm not that much older than you, dude." Like, but my generation is. You're right. Our generation of gamers is so different. Even the 10-year
Right.
gap between I'm 41, and you look at gamers who are 30 now, that 10-year gap, technology leapt forward
Oh, for sure.
so much in that 10-year gap that they had a completely different experience in gaming than I did. And then I look at
Yeah.
like my nephew now, as he just turned 6, and we're playing Minecraft with him on Sunday nights. And I've been laughing because I never played Minecraft, and I consider myself a video game veteran, and I don't know anything about this game, and I'm getting schooled by a 6-year-old on Sunday nights on how to play this game, and you know, that actually spins off a different conversation that I just thought of as I was talking about that. A game like Minecraft, which does Minecraft have an end game? I don't know of one.
Survival games, really, in general, technically no, right? You can keep building your base forever, and then you can build more bases, and you can PVE forever, or you could go PvP. Technically, depends on how the game goes, right? There's different options with that, but no, I don't think so. And it's something a lot of us have talked about, and you can see the success of the survival crafter builder genre in general. The Minecraft kids, the initial ones, not that all of them were kids. I had a 40-year-old musician in a band with me, and he loved playing Minecraft when we were driving in the van to another show. Like he loved it. But the Minecraft kids, they're not kids anymore. And they're growing up And it's almost weird seeing my stepson, for example, grew up with Minecraft and Terraria and stuff, and seeing him dive into games. He is very, very thorough and very much almost reverted back to the older generation, like yourself, Ren. Like, he wants to be immersed in all that stuff. Now, he's also a kid that's,
Yeah.
12, 13, that does
Yeah.
some silly stuff that I'm like, why would you do that? That's just ridiculous. You jumped and glitched yourself through the building.
Oh yeah,
like,
he burned our house
you know.
down this last Sunday because we had our
Right.
first our we had two houses built, and our starter house was made out of wood because that's what we had at the time, and we'd used that to store all of our chests, which had all of our crafting supplies. And
Oh,
my brother Joey and I were off mining in the tunnels, and all we hear is he starts going, "Oh my God, the house is on fire!" And so I was nowhere close, and my brother was literally like running through the game, and he's like, "All of our crafting materials are there," and he got there just in time to save like the section of the house that had all the crafting stuff, but still the other half of the house got torched down because he just he's 6, right?
right,
So, but
right.
so he's doing things that you and I wouldn't think about doing because it's like it's stupid
Yeah.
stuff. But he got a little careless when he was crafting. He was cooking fish, and he got a little careless, and the
Yep.
fire got out of control. It burned his garden down, and it burned half the house down. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
just like, oh my God.
Oh no, my kid, and no offense to the beta testers for Carth, you guys are great, but he's too young to put into our real Discord community and talking with all these other kind of adults. He's my kid, so he's the best beta tester I've ever seen in my life. And there's glitches and bugs he finds that I have no idea, and I don't even write them down. I'm like, well, let's hope nobody else tries jumping 14 times at that window of that building that somehow super sprung them across the map, because that ain't gonna happen. And I did it. It doesn't make sense. Like some magic happened that you only figured out. But
If I ever get in the Carth, I'm gonna be jumping on all those windows.
just to
I
see
know. Super
what's
spring yourself to the end game.
what are some examples of really bad end game in your minds? Like some of the worst examples you've seen, things that you think just shouldn't be done in an MMO.
Oh yeah, well I've already talked on it. I mean, right now Project 99, uh, they when I was there when it was like Ruins of Kunark. It was that expansion was there for a long time. It was before Bellius came out, and you had all these raid guilds like park on top of the mobs. Like I was telling you before, they had the skeleton crew knocking all the mini bosses down, and as soon as the mob popped, there's 70 people logging in and smacking like a whack-a-mole. That was horrible, and it was on like it went on like that for a year, and it was just one of those things where like you were talking about the token system. That's why that token system kind of exists because of shit like that. Uh,
Instancing is also
it,
another good example.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's why
But
instancing exists these days.
yeah. So what I'd like to what some kind of fixes to that would be like, so if it's fine to have an open world, but you can't just spawn right on top of you can't log in and log out right on top of the beast you get ejected or something. But the thing that I would do is like we were talking with a token, maybe so often so you don't have a bottleneck. Say so this one guild has 180 people in it, and they're never going to get that dragon because they're not going to park 70 people on that spawn point. So what you need is have like a ghost spawn with a token or something that way they can have their own time, their own way to defeat the dragon, and then not the people as well, not race those other guild as well.
So,
Stuff like that's okay to me, but there is the issue that maybe not as many items drop off that certain mob because that's not a real, spawned mob.
because that brings
But
up
yeah,
the
you gotta
question
you
of
gotta come up, you gotta come up with cool ideas, innovative ideas to combat things like that.
because what you just mentioned that goes back to the Vanguard system. But I'm wondering if there's, what are looking at that there, there's kind of I'm torn on this is what I'm getting at. Hang on, let me get this out of my mouth here. I'm torn on that because I love instances and I hate instances. And I love that system that you just described, but I know some people hate it for the same reason that I hate instances. Um, because when you I guess, how do I say this in a better way? I like that version of it better, which is the way Vanguard did it. You can spawn the encounter in the open world somewhere and still allow people to participate if you want to let them participate, as opposed to the instance zone where everything is happening in this closed space and no one ever sees it or can participate or can help out. Which that's the only downside to instancing. I love instancing apart from that because instancing, one of the things I hated in the Lukeland expansion um, for EverQuest was getting keyed for Vexthal because I think it was Maiden's Eye was the name of the zone. It's been a long time since I played through there, but there was a component that you needed from a raid boss, and the big guilds would get that on lockdown and purposefully block anyone else on the server from getting past that point. That way they could be the only people raiding in the final zone of the game. And they would keep it locked down until the next expansion launched, and then they would finally relinquish control and move on and do the same thing. And that pissed me off so
Oh yeah,
much that when
that's when
instant
devs need to get involved.
Right, exactly. And that's when we started to see things like instancing come into play and Vanguard doing the golden bombs because I was like, well, that's not fun for the other, 9 guilds that are trying to do the content. I'm all for open world bosses that people can compete against to get as long as it's not related to progression. The moment something becomes related to progression,
Yeah,
and
then that's
then it needs to be instanced in some way. Um, I know something
yeah.
you'd mentioned earlier, Scribbles. We tried this, and we were doing a lot of this in the Saga Alpha, which was randomizing the spawn location for boss mobs anywhere within a radius. And I cannot tell you how many people got so frustrated and pissed off by that because they're so accustomed to figuring out the spawn point and then camping that spawn point
Mhm.
and knowing it and putting it in a wiki and then always knowing where to go, like you were saying, the guilds on Project 1999. And so what we did is we randomized the spawn point and we randomized the spawn timer. So nothing had a set spawn timer because that's the other thing with EverQuest. You can go in these days and it's like there's guides like Solusec A. It's an 18-minute spawn cycle. So it's like you just set a timer after you've killed the first mob and you know that 18 minutes later it's going to respawn. And by having a randomized timer and a randomized location, it really frustrated people because they had
Mm.
gotten into this habit over the years of knowing exactly where to go once they figured it out. And once it's randomized, I love it because
Yeah.
I'm always for anything I can do to keep people from putting a wiki up. In my mind, is a good thing. Some things are going to end up getting wikified, but I
Mhm.
love that uh, element of not
Well, and
knowing.
Surprise, yeah.
yeah,
I
and that's
also
that's something I really like too. And some games have done it decently well in the past. That's something we've looked at with Carth when we talked about the different mini kind of bosses. It's not a traditional MMO like we said, but we want these RPG factors and the things we loved. So, but the randomized and different time, some not as special, some very much special, maybe some, as this goes, and it's a very rare chance this boss would spawn, and then there's a rare chance of only these specific items that you couldn't craft that you could, it is a fantasy setting, so it's not it's something for me that seems amazing. And
it's
tough
different,
tough
yeah.
luck. Yeah, tough luck if you're not the guy that randomly was close enough to this portal that opened
Oh,
and got to go fight this guy and actually pulled it together with his friends and got this sword that's, this much better than the other stuff you're able to get, or
and
special.
and and sorry that I piss off all the data miners too. So, who really cares? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what
Data
to tell you,
mining
but
pisses me off, but yeah.
I want to talk. I want to talk a little bit about the younger gamers trying to get in older games, like we were talking about earlier. Uh, so I thought, we're going for an older style game, EverQuest elements, and I thought that, man. So our age bracket, everybody that's searching for us would be probably, I don't know, 35 to 50. Like those are my
Key
prime
demographics, yeah.
demographic.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I came across the data with Google Analytics, and it turns out that my main audience is 25 to 35. I
Good
was like
luck.
blown away. I was like
There you go.
I was like, why? Why are you guys? Why is the young guy? They're just like it. They want it more. They want more challenge. So
Hmm.
I mean, you got Dark Souls that's popular right now. Think games like that. Uh, so I mean, you get the survival games out there that they're beating each other up. So I think that has something to play in it. They just want a harder game.
And somewhat with the survival games that the grind, like we can say Valheim did extremely well. It looks like a great game. My kid's played it. He loves it to an extent, but it's kind of a grind. It's not fully fleshed out in a way of an MMORPG with as many quests and different things to do, where you have these, I and it's not exactly, but the Minecraft kids, they're not kids anymore. They're exploring out into these things, and they talk to their parents. And my kid talks to me, and I'm going way back in the day and want to show him, maybe not NES because he'd just be bored, but here's Super NES Zelda, play that. Like, let me dust this thing off, like you, and seeing it.
Oh
And
man.
yeah, Defend the Night, I've looked at your guys' game. It's great. I'm excited for it and seeing what, slowly and steady what you guys are getting. You are going to have a lot of appeal to a lot of different people branching out in a sense. And
Right.
these kids have grown up, almost all of them, being able to play with their friends with Terraria, Minecraft, the internet, what it is now, technology. They didn't even need incredible computers. Tablet worked for them. And
Yeah.
now that they get a little older, they still want to play
They
with those
want
friends.
something a little different, something that's
Yep.
got a little more meat on its bones.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
well, I've already, because my brother's already kind of tested with my nephew. Let him run around in Lord of the Rings Online and Star Wars. No, I don't think he's done Star Wars Old Republic yet, but he has tried Lord of the Rings Online. But it's a little too complex for him because it's so text heavy. He reads great, but it's a text heavy game. So you actually have to sit there and read quests to figure out where to go and what to do, as opposed to Minecraft, where it's more about combining things and experimenting, and it's more of I guess maybe the best analogy I could give would be like it's puzzle based as opposed to text based where you have to read a lot. And so that for the 6-year-old mind that's still figuring all that out, there's that hands-on element. But as people get older, it's no different than like I'm going to use a very base example, but like when I was 4 years old reading an alphabet book versus being 6 and reading Lord of the Rings and not
Mm-hmm.
understanding half of it, but then being 20 and reading The Wheel of Time. And it's just like this progression of as you get older, you want to tackle
Yeah.
more difficult subject matter and challenge yourself. Some people, anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
I think Lord of the Rings would be like a wheelhouse for like 11-year-old.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
it was
Yeah.
way too much. I remember I read it when I was like, I think I read Narnia when I was 5, and then Hobbit and Narnia books when I was 5, and then Lord of the Rings at 6. And I loved it, but I also didn't. There's so much going on
Don't
there
get it.
for a six
Right.
year old, that it's like it's cool and it's like, ooh, Gandalf and Aragorn and the ring and there's all these things going on, but it's also you're not understanding the importance and the intricacy of who Glorfindel is or Tom Bombadil, and the poems and songs don't mean that much to you at 6 years old, but then you get older and you're like, oh, so that's why Aragorn is singing this song because he's comparing himself in his relationship with Arwen to Beren and Luthien, and it's like there's so much more going on. I will tie this back into gaming, I promise. There's that going on when you see these kids who have grown up with like Minecraft, and now they're getting to be late teens, early 20s, and like you said, the Dark Souls thing. People want these games that are hard or harder anyway. And they enjoy that. At least there's a demographic that enjoys that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
A
There's
big demographic, a big one.
well, that's the other thing too is gaming is just getting bigger every year.
True.
Especially, I think the big thing is no different than when I first got into writing as a career in 2008. Um, there was this land rush of English language content required for websites because people were just building websites. Not as it wasn't the boom of the late 90s. It wasn't the dot com boom, but it was still this big thing where, and it was because now all of a sudden everybody in Australia was getting high-speed internet. Everybody in the UK was getting high-speed internet. And the high-speed internet was expanding beyond major cities in the US, and it was expanding to major cities around the world. And so there's this need to populate websites. Um, and as time has gone on, we've now seen that grow across the planet, and it's way beyond just English now. Now there's websites in every language of the world. Gaming is no different in the sense that in the 90s and early 2000s, it was very much kind of United States, Canada, and to the UK, countries that were the first world countries. But then as we've gotten high-speed internet everywhere around the world, gaming has just grown. I mean,
Yeah.
you just have to look at console sales. Every single time they come out with a new console, it breaks sales records for the previous generation by
Right.
sometimes, tens of millions of copies because we've got 10 million more people who have disposable income and want to get into gaming. Um, it's great. There's no downside to being in the game development market, regardless of what genre you're in. It doesn't have to be MMORPGs. There are people playing. I see stuff all the time on Facebook, and I'm like, I would never play that, but it sold 7,000 copies. So obviously, there's a market for that, and some little mom and pop development team with 2 people or 3 people, made enough money to eat for the year.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like it's great.
Yep.
Um, Is there anything else we've not talked about? I'm looking at the list real quick here. We've talked about good, bad, ugly versions of in-game, our favorite versions, things we don't like, dailies and tokens. Um,
Yeah, make good games,
yeah,
and all gamers
good content.
are different. All gamers are different. We all fall into a certain demographic, and we like immersing ourselves and reading the stories, listening, watching the cutscenes the first time through, caring for our characters, etc. And there's a lot of people that don't, and possibly we're coming on to some kids that want that, or they're looking for more than Minecraft, and they're looking for a little more depth than that, and maybe we'll see it turn around a little bit.
Yeah, and
But
tastes also
I still
change.
know
Yeah.
my kid's still going to run to that yellow marker every single time as fast as humanly possible.
I am
So
looking forward to seeing the evolution of MMORPGs beyond um, static quests that tell you to go from here to here, because that does create that end point, that end game that I need to get to. I think what you said earlier about survival games not necessarily having an end point. I think as we see more MMORPGs introduce survival elements into their games, I think that might be the natural evolution. I'm interested to see
could be.
because I swore I'm not a big PvP player, but I love Dune. And the fact that Funcom is doing Dune as a survival PvP game,
Right.
I was initially torn by that. However, in the past couple of years, I've gotten a little bit more into these survival games. I wasn't big into them. I'm still not big into them, but more PS4 games are starting to have survival elements to them, and so I've become more accustomed to that. And I'm starting to see them become more mainstream beyond just Minecraft and Valheim and so on and so forth. And it sounds like what you guys are doing with Carth. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Funcom does with a big AAA budget, with a huge IP like Dune, and to
Right.
see how they can meld MMORPG with survival. Because the Conan games didn't. They're good, but they're not like huge. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves in that point. To
Yeah,
get
it's interesting. A little bit of realism thrown in. I think you'll see more MMOs throw in, hunger and thirst and possibly cold and stuff. And those are kind of the staples of that survival. And people want base building, things like that. It's not. It is hard for an MMO doing that. Just knowing how parts of game development work to
mm,
allow all of your players to build wherever
it's a
your beautiful
nightmare.
world and your map. It turns into a nightmare
Yeah.
when you have that many people building. So
Mm.
you know
As the tech gets
um,
better, I think that'll become less of a
yeah,
technological challenge too.
we'll find out. It'll be a couple years, I assume. I know Unreal Engine 5 demo stuff and beta came
I'm
out.
liking
It's
what I'm
beautiful,
seeing
but
so far. It's looking
it's
interesting.
it's incredibly beautiful, but aimed for consoles is
Yep.
my opinion still, because we don't have computers fast enough to,
Handle
we
the
got
processing.
$4,000 computer can't handle doing really what makes Unreal Engine 5 better than other
Yeah.
stuff. Those next gen consoles can.
And the thing I love
they
about
just
Unreal, on a side note, because this, and I will tie this back into gaming and the evolution of gaming, is everything that Disney is doing with Star Wars right now, The Mandalorian and the 360 soundstage that they have now,
Mhm,
where they're building the virtual set that's the backdrop, that is 100% done in Unreal Engine.
mhm,
So think about that for a minute, because that is pushing technology for the film industry, but at the same time, it's also pushing the the technology for what games are capable of doing when
mhm.
they're at the absolute maximum end of the spectrum, obviously, when you have an unlimited budget. But that technology is so cool. For those of you who haven't ever looked into that tech, it's all Unreal. Um, and it's just it's mind blowing what they can do now with not needing to actually go out and build these huge sets, and not needing to go out and freeze their balls off in the middle of nowhere if they're trying to do a snow scene, or sweat to death in the middle of a desert. You could do
For
it all on
sure.
a soundstage.
I want to add that it's either Houdini, Maya, or Blender as well with the
There
Unreal
are
Engine.
there are
But
some mixtures. There are some things mixed in
It's
there.
there's
true.
a lot of mixtures. Yeah.
Lot of other things added to
Yeah.
making the games or the or different videos, but it is amazing, and I think we're a few years out to seeing some huge graphic quality with
Jumps. Yeah.
MMOs, with MMOs and multiplayer games, because that's another beast in itself too. You could see the difference between Elder Scrolls Online, which looks even better than when it first came out, and Skyrim. Everyone was waiting for Skyrim 6 online. Yeah, that didn't happen. Graphic
Xbox
quality wise,
exclusive
great game.
now.
Yeah. So, well, you want that graphic quality? That's what we just said.
Yep.
You're going to use
Whatever tech is
something
available.
that, yeah, for the masses. That's it. But it's exciting.
It's good things to come. All right, where can we find you guys? List all the places we can find you. I'll make sure to drop links below, but just for everybody who's listening as well, where can we find you on a day-to-day basis?
Start with Carth, right? Let's do that.
Yeah, yeah. You can find Carth on Steam. We'll link it down below. We have an active Discord community as well as a pretty active Twitter. And we can leave all the links below. We're going to be available June 16th for live demo through
Hang on.
Steam.
I gotta mark that date because I will forget.
Yeah. No
Um,
worries. June 16th, it goes live on Steam for the Steam Next Fest.
how long is
We'll
the
have some live.
demo?
The Next Fest is
How long
1
is it gonna
week.
be up? I guess is what I was gonna say.
1 week is the fest. How long we'll leave it up, we haven't exactly decided. It depends.
Well,
It
just until you
depends.
get the data you
That's
need. Yeah.
Well, realistically, we'll see. We'll see how it goes, and does it behoove us to do that? Steam also has this playtest feature that looks kind of neat, kind of the same thing, a demo, but meant more for getting feedback from people more so than just people can play a chunk of the game for free.
And no NDA. Could stream away.
Stream away, and you don't even have to talk to us if you don't want to. I believe you can remain anonymous. It's kind of scary actually to think about it, so I go back and forth. But
Yeah, because the
yeah,
playtest, the Steam doesn't want you to have an NDA. So that's the thing that's driving us away from it, because
yeah.
I mean, there's still stuff that we don't want to have everybody looking at. But yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you guys want to see Defend the Night, we're at Defend the Night on Twitter, or www.defendthenightgame.com, and that'll get you there. Join our Discord, have a conversation with us. We're always available.
All right, so all of you who are watching this, let us know in the comments below, what do you like, dislike about Endgame? What are some of your favorite memories or favorite examples, or even worst case examples? Let us know in the comments below. Of course, don't forget to like, share, all the things you need to do. Check these guys out, follow them, go join their Discords, everything else. Subscribe to this channel, hit the bell icon to get updates for future episodes, and stick around because we'll be back next week with another episode. Until next time, everybody.
Thanks.